Hi everyone, and welcome to our webinar. You're listening to IXIAtalks Episode 8, Reasons to Move to Structured Content and How. I'm Sidney Jones, Head of Marketing Communications here at IXIAsoft, and I'll be your host. IXIAtalks is a webinar series that covers data, agile document management, localization, IXIAsoft's very own CCMS, and more. Episodes are released periodically and cover a wide range of topics in the telecom industry. If you've listened to our webinar before, you know the housekeeping details drill. But for those of you who are tuning in for the first time, welcome. There are a few things that you should know. First off, this webinar is being recorded. We'll send you a link to the recorded version about an hour or two after it airs, so you can share it with colleagues who weren't able to make it today. If you're wondering if we can hear you, don't worry, we can't. As audience members, you are muted. And finally, if you'd like to ask a question during the webinar, please type it into the questions section of your control panel in the upper left-hand corner of your screen, and we will answer these during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. So now, on to the show. Our guest today is Manager of Consulting at JANA Inc., Don Bridges. Hello, Don, and welcome to IXIAtalks.
Hello, Sidney.
So Don, what are we talking about today?
Well, we're going to talk about the reasons that you may want to move to structured content and a little bit of how you might proceed to go do that.
So before we get into it, Don, I'll let you introduce yourself to our audience and give us a brief overview of the agenda.
Well, thank you again, Sidney. Greetings from Albuquerque, New Mexico, where our high today is 86 degrees, which if you're, I guess, on the Celsius system, 30 degrees Celsius. A lovely day here in the 505 area code. Just a little bit about me. I have been, boy, I'm dating myself, going back in the technical information world for over 20 years. I've worked with a lot of different companies, helping them adapt the processes and technology to meet business challenges. I probably am technical enough to be dangerous, but when we start getting into the details of things, I quite honestly get a little scared and trend back over to the business side of the world. I will mention that I have an engineering degree from LSU, go Tigers, and am a frequent conference speaker. So what we would like to, or what I would like to talk with you about today is structured content, which for most situations means XML, but certainly not always. Talk a little bit about what we feel is important to your management, having talked with management over the years. And invariably it's reducing cost and increasing revenue. And so what we'd like to talk about is the reasons that structured content can help you reduce your cost, and also talk a little bit about what structured content may be able to do as far as increasing revenue, both very important to your management. And then finally, maybe get into the and how. How do you go about getting towards structured content? So maybe I should start at the beginning and talk about what is structured content. And this is the Wikipedia definition. I'll leave it to your own devices to read it. But structured content, like I said, it's typically XML. There is typically metadata on top of the XML. And metadata is information about the information. So if you look at a label on a can, you don't have to open the can to know what's inside. Metadata allows you to go look at the content and say, okay, here's information about this content. Invariably, there is tagging of content much beyond heading 1, heading 2, paragraph, but saying, okay, well, here's cost information. Here is, which you would never see in HTML, or here's information that details what the content is. So, Sidney, maybe before we get going too far, do you have a survey to kind of maybe help us understand the audience?
I do. So to our audience, we're trying something new this webinar. We'd like to poll you with 2 questions during our webinar. We'll ask the second one a little later. So what I'll do here is I'll launch the poll, and you should be able to see the question on your screen here. And the question is, what is your department's primary authoring tool? So if you could just take a minute to answer the poll, I'll give you 15 or 20 seconds, and then we'll announce the answers once everyone's got their response in. And John, I don't think you're allowed to vote, so we can't skew the system.
Okay, I won't vote.
Okay, so maybe 5-10 more seconds here. Looks like we've got a few more coming in. And all right, so I'll close this. And we'll share the results. Now, Don, can you see the results on your screen?
I can, Sidney.
Okay, so we've got 18% Word, 0% InDesign, 27% FrameMaker unstructured, 55% XML based, and 0% Interleaf/Quicksilver.
So it looks like if I add those two quickly in my head, 45% in Word are in unstructured FrameMaker, and 55% in XML. So, those of you that are in Word or unstructured Frame, I think this will hopefully be a lot of new information. And for those of you that are in an XML-based authoring environment, I hope this will be confirmation of things or maybe a reminder of things. So very good information. Thank you, Sidney.
Okay, so on to the next slide then.
And are we there? Because I still see the slide, but if you tell me where, I still see the poll results.
All right.
Now we're good. Now we're good.
Okay.
So in talking with upper management, you find out that of course increased revenue is important. Actually, it's the most important thing. If you look at what are the bonuses that upper management are paid, invariably it's driven by increased revenue. That is the most important. Decreased cost are important, but they are not the most important thing. And then there's certainly things like intangible value. What is intangible value meaning? That's things like supplying the same information consistently, having it so that customers can see your content regardless of what device they're using. How do you go place a dollar sign on that? And the answer is you can, kind of, and we'll talk about that. But if you're looking at strictly at increasing the revenue that you're responsible for as a technical information creator, invariably that's two phases. One is a pre-purchase phase before somebody buys it, and then a customer phase once they have your product or service. How do they go use that technical information to use that product or service? And if that's maybe a bit of a change. If on the next slide, if you go back, let's say to the 90s, 20 years ago, you had marketing that kind of did their thing in the pre-purchase phase and sales, and then there was a buy decision, and then voila, things kind of turned on their head. Whereas now, okay, we have tech pubs and customer support, four very different organizations that would supply information. Whereas now what we're seeing is more and more of a common information experience, that technical information feeds marketing and maybe even feeds sales, so that a customer can say, is this the right product for me? And then obviously once they're a customer, you support them. So we see a much tighter integration between technical information, and there's always been an integration between technical information and training, but now it has spilled over into marketing, and certainly it's spilled over to customer support. And organizations more and more are trying to say, we want common terminologies, common wording, common icons, common presentation throughout the information experience. So if you look at the upper management, I've said increasing revenue. What's important? Next slide, please. What's important, I've mentioned, cost savings and revenue generation and customer satisfaction. And maybe if you work in technical information, this may be a little bit of a surprise for you as far as what's not important. And that's like what tools you're using. They don't care. What style guide you use. They don't care. And what technology you use. They don't care. So, the focus is consistently on how do I grow the revenue of the company? How do I save money? And how do I keep my customers satisfied? And if you're doing those things, you will have a seat at the table with upper management. They will be interested if you can show where you're driving those things. They're very interested in your contribution, and you're not this backwater tech pubs group off in the corner that, those people that use typewriters. No, you actually are considered, or would be more considered as somebody that, we need to have these folks dialed in. So On the next slide, we talk about decreased cost, and we'll talk about these in a little bit more detail, but we kind of boiled it down to what we see is three primary functions. One is, how do you go increase your efficiency? How do you have more manual automations? If you're using Word or FrameMaker, I suspect you spend more than a little bit of time formatting content. I suspect that if you have the same information in multiple places, you copy and paste. And when it needs to be updated, you have to go back and remember, okay, where are all the places that this information is that I need to go back in and update? Second of all, we've seen collaboration really become much more of a buzzword in, I'd say, the last 10 years. And at conferences, from conferences 20 years ago, I don't remember hearing the word collaboration. I hear it a lot more. So people are interested, how do I get my subject matter experts or SMEs involved? And then certainly as companies become more, I'll call them international, the issue of how do I go reducing translation cost? All very important. And the good news is that structured content really addresses those in a very positive way. And we'll dig into that in a little bit. The flip side of the coin is, how do you go increase revenue? And from study after study that we've seen, and certainly we'll talk about these in a little bit, having informed prospects and happy customers is paramount to increasing your revenue. We guess that most of you have seen studies that said, it's easier to keep a customer than to go create new customers. And so if you can provide them the information that they need in a pre-sales environment that works towards that goal, and if they can better know how to operate or configure or service your product, support, that works towards that goal. So if I drill this down and say, what are the key takeaways that I need to do from a technical information perspective? Again, we've cooked it down to three. One is, what content is being accessed? If you want to call this analytics, I would probably agree with that. But to understand, what are my customers reading, and is it the best that it can be? And the flip side of that is, what is content that's not being accessed, and why? The second of all is making it easier for both prospects and customers to find the content that they need. We're kind of in a Google world where people want to have the results show up immediately, and so that is important. And then thirdly is we are in a mobile world. I would suspect the great majority of people on this call have a smartphone and use it to go check email and use it to go browse the web. And that's certainly a change from 20 years ago. So maybe we should dig a little bit deeper and talk about decreased cost. And I mentioned these earlier. One is, how do I go improve my process? How do I go collaborate with subject matter experts to go have their inputs, which reduces the cycle time? And finally, reduce translation. So process efficiency as far as an avenue towards decreasing cost. Next slide. And there's really two main ways that structured content allows you to go improve your process efficiency. The first is called content reuse, and content reuse is being able to create content once and use it in multiple, I use the term documents, places might be a better phrase, multiple instances. And so there are some data models. If you've heard of DITA before, DITA is maybe most noteworthy because content reuse is built in, and it allows you to go create that content once and easily go use it in multiple places. The second piece, and this is really common with every flavor of XML, is the concept called single source publishing, and that's using your content to go create multiple output formats, be it PDF, be it HTML, without manual formatting. And like I said, DocBook will do it, DITA will do it, S1000D will do it, because in XML, content is separate from formatting. The second area, as far as decreasing cost, is what we call efficient collaboration. And having worked in engineering organizations in the past, certainly my experience and most of my customers' experiences are that engineering is where most technical information comes from. Support, certainly some of it, sales, maybe a little bit of it, but engineering is where your subject matter experts invariably live. And you'll want to go collaborate with subject matter experts to make sure that the information that you create is the most accurate. And certainly if you're able to go provide them just the, I'll use the term chunk of information that they're interested in and not the entire document, that's a more efficient review process. Sure, you can send them the entire document, but if they're only interested, you've only changed one little chunk of it, that leads to a more process. And certainly some tools allow very efficient collaboration. And if that's important to you, you ought to say, when I'm looking at technology, what can you do for me as far as collaboration? The third, as far as decreasing cost, is reducing translation cost on the next slide. And I've alluded to the fact that with some data models, data being the most noteworthy, you have these chunks of information. If you want to think of Lego blocks, that's probably a pretty good visualization of your content. And if only some Lego blocks have changed, only some chunks of your content have changed, it makes it more efficient to reduce your translation. It makes it more, it's faster, it's cheaper if you're only translating those chunks that have changed and not the entire document. So that's how structured content, and specifically modular or data content, allows you to go reduce your translation cost. Now, that's important, and that's all very important. The flip side of that is, if we dig a little deeper into increased revenue and what can structured content do, how does it facilitate increased revenue? And again, these three things: understanding what content is accessed, making your content easier to find, and then providing it regardless of how someone is accessing it. So the next slide, we'll talk about the first of those, understanding what content is accessed. Because you're delivering chunks of information instead of an entire book, and certainly in data, that's what you're doing. You serve it up at a chunk level, and you can have that much more granular aspect. So instead of, if you're providing content in PDF, do you know who's downloaded that PDF book? Sure you do, or you can. But is that the same as knowing, what parts of that manual were they interested in? How long did they stay there? What were the search terms that they used? So understanding what content is accessed is important towards driving happy customers. And the flip side of that is content that is not accessed is, you kind of say, why not? Is there something wrong with it? Do I not have the right metadata, the search terms set up to go do this? So as far as tips go, focus on frequently accessed content to make sure it's as good as it can be. I mean, that's your best foot forward. And then infrequently accessed content, is it just not applicable to my customers anymore? Then why are you wasting server space with it? Or does it need some kind of a polish or cleanup to make this more better? It's just not answering the question. So understanding what content is accessed, very important. The second is, as we move to a Google environment and maybe even an Amazon kind of world, people want to go find the information that they need quickly. They want to find that needle in the haystack quickly. And yep, you can go use Boolean searches or full text searches, and that's nice. But if you're familiar with Amazon, and I would suspect 95% of us are, saying, I'm only interested in the Sunny Tech solar panel, and I want something that's new, and I want to use an inverter, and only want a product with 4 stars. You're able to, because Amazon's data is tagged richly, structured content, you can go say, these are the things that are important to me, and quickly go find the information that I need. So we think this faceted kind of search is very critical towards making your customers happy. making your prospects, easy to use and saying, hey, you care, you give a darn about my search experience. And then finally, on the next slide, we're moving much more from a desktop world 20 years ago to a mobile world. And if you've ever tried to look at PDF documents on a mobile browser, it's typically frustrating at best. PDF will not respond to the size of your screen. So if you are able to go deliver content as HTML, and typically that's HTML5 these days, then that it's responsive. So if you're looking on a tablet, it presents it one way. If you're looking at a mobile device, not that I recommend mobile devices for looking at reading technical manuals, but it happens. But tablets are the most prevalent. It will respond to the size of the tablet. So I think all of those are very important aspects to go increasing revenue. And you go, that's nice, Don, but how do I go quantify this? So typically we're looking using a term called return on investment, or ROI. So we're going to kind of shift gears from these are the things that are important to the and how. How do you go do this? And return on investment is really a function of two things. What is the return? Meaning how much are you going to get back? Either increasing revenue, decreasing cost, both important, or from the investment, how much does the software cost? How much does the training cost? How much does the workflows cost? How much is content migration? And this can be a big deal. This can be a deal breaker. So the harder part of that is quantifying increased revenue. And the results from a Lightspeed survey a couple of years ago, over half of global respondents are accessing technical information to learn about it before they buy it. And I would say in a B2B environment, which I would expect most of us are, at least on this webinar, you're accessing technical information before you go buy something to make sure, is this a good fit? Maybe even 3 out of 4 are saying product information is essential to good customer service. It's really important. And almost 3/4 are saying product, and this was from 2 years ago. I suspect these numbers have just increased in the last 2 years. But quality product information, easy to find, easy to read, concisely what I want, written well, written clearly, make it more likely that they will recommend that brand to others. And certainly from a sales perspective, that's exactly what you want. But it's still really, how do you go though from those numbers to saying, okay, good technical information is important. I did a webinar, 4 months ago, or not a webinar, a presentation with a former director at Juniper and at Cisco. And he told the story of how customers were asked, what value would they place on their technical documentation? And the answer was never, ever below 20% the price of their product. So I would challenge you to, if you can ask your customers, what value do you place on technical documentation? I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. It won't be, well, there's no value, and they're certainly not going to say, oh, it's 100%. But I would be surprised if it's below 20%. So if you look at that, you can kind of sort of start to quantify and say, how much from a increasing revenue am I getting with making my content easier to access and concise in my language? The other side of that, and quite honestly, this is much easier, is saying, when I move to structured content, what is the cost savings that I would anticipate? Why cost savings? Because it's easier to go reuse content than recreate content. It's easier to have your formatting done once and applied universally than doing it over and over and over. For this purpose, we have and there's the website down at the bottom of this slide, a cost savings calculator. No, we don't capture your name. You will not hear back from us. We don't make you fill out anything, but you can go fill out the information as far as how many writers you have, how much content's created, how many languages do you translate to, and so on and so forth, some metrics that we ask you to do, and it will give you a number. If you'd like to see, well, Don, how did you calculate that number? I'll send you the Excel spreadsheet. You can go see how we calculated that number. I will mention that maybe We typically see people leading with cost savings, and cost savings are very important. But we also have heard bad stories of people that will go to get their project funded, will go oversell the return, and that's bad. That can lead to bad things for your career if you make promises that you're not able to keep. So I would add the warning: please, please, please don't go oversell. Now, with cost, not only do you have to consider the cost savings, but you have to go consider, okay, well, I've got to potentially go buy software to go make this happen. I have to go train people. And this is where I would tell you that you find the right technology to go meet your needs, not somebody else's needs, your needs. And you can certainly go maybe buy too much technology, and that'll kill your budget, and you'll have stuff that you never use. Maybe you can go buy too little technology, and my wording here was very deliberate, that if you buy too little technology, your replacement will be shopping for a replacement in a few years. So, a cautionary tale: you don't want to buy too much, you don't want to buy too little, you want to buy just right. Just the right technology that meets your requirements, both near and present. It works with your budget and has the capabilities that address your business needs. Now, one of the things that I see, and I have deleted the name of the person that submitted this question on LinkedIn, but I see this with surprising frequency, in that people will say, hey, what's the best tool that is going to allow me to go do this and that? And people will chip in, and I appreciate the crowdsourcing of kind of answers. I appreciate that people are happy to say, well, this is what worked for us, but the precautionary tale is that unless it's fitted for your environment, you don't want too much, you don't want too little, you want just right. And unless you have a very good understanding of your business requirements, what are your constraints, what are your real goals, it's very difficult to get an answer to a question like this that's worth anything. So as far as how do you go about, and the technology is maybe a big part, but certainly not the biggest part of what the investment, that return on an investment is. Maybe a couple of tips on the next slide of how to go select technology. And as I've said, first thing I think you want to do is go understand what your business needs are and understand your requirements. And I know that some folks look at IT as those evil folks that are always saying no and not now, but you're probably going to need to include IT. Certainly if you move to a cloud environment, that maybe lessens it, but I have yet seen a TechPubs implementation, a technical information implementation, that does not at some level involve IT. You have to go understand what data model you'll need, and are there nuances for your specific situation. I've mentioned DITA because it really supports content reuse well. It's widely supported. There's conferences that talk about DITA. You don't see conferences that talk about DocBook, and certainly you don't see conferences that talk about your data model crafted specifically for you. But until you get those first three things down, I would say going after technology is maybe premature. And I will say that if you can find an agnostic consultant who doesn't resell anybody's software, that can help you through the process and keep your interests first, instead of the dirty secret that if you become a reseller of software, that software company is going to give you a little money back. And that can maybe cloud the judgment a little bit. So we think there's an importance in finding a agnostic consultant. Now, once you've bought technology, are all your problems solved? And the answer is, unfortunately, no. If you're going to have metadata, you probably want a strategy for that. You want to go make sure, is this the right content model for me? Do I need to go tweak it? Most data models are a framework. They're not exactly how you want. If I said, I'm going to go build a house, and there's lots of choices with building a house. But if you say, no, I want a 2-bedroom, 2-bath, I want a galley kitchen, blah, blah, blah. Okay, all these things are workable, but you have to go define them up front. When we talk about content reuse, and this is maybe the dirty, nasty secret of DITA, is people say, oh, I want to go reuse my content, of course. But unless you have a content reuse strategy, it's very difficult. It's very difficult. If you're chunking up your content, there's something called taxonomies, where taxonomy is the organization of your information. Taxonomies will help you classify that content so that you can go find it later on. You'll typically have workflows. How, when I create content, what is my review cycle? Most content management systems, the better ones, will have those automated. So instead of sending around an email that says, hey, go check this, it will automatically, once you say it's ready for review, it knows who the reviewers are, it goes off and does the review. Certainly there's legacy content that will likely be need to be converted to your new data model. Style sheets is what I had alluded to when I said structured content allows you to go deliver the information in an automated manner. It basically says, when I see this information, here's how I need to go style it, whether I'm HTML or PDF. And then of course there's training and support. I will say a consultant can help you go estimate these costs. And if you worry, gosh, we can never afford all this, a consultant can help you put all this together and say, here's what we would anticipate the return, and here's what we anticipate the investment to be. And then you can go figure out, is this the right fit for us? Maybe one last note on putting together plans. And I've heard people maybe use proof of concept and pilot interchangeably. In my way of thinking, they're not. Proof of concept is just, can it work? Maybe not completely the way that you would want it, but philosophically, and if your imagination's pretty doggone good, can it work? Pilot goes into, will it work? Once and you can think of pilot almost as pre-production. So that I've got things set up most of the way, but before I go full bore into a new technical information system, I'm going to make sure that it's give myself a chance to refine, and it's your test run, if we can say. And I think test is very important. And then finally, maybe putting it all together. What does on the next slide? What does that life cycle as far as technical information look like? We tend to believe that metrics are a very good starting point to find out, how long is it taking to go do something? How am I doing? And metrics allow you to go measure that. And I know that there's CIDM and others have put a lot of time into understanding metrics. Some of the content management systems will allow you to go generate some metrics for them, but those metrics will allow you to, and yeah, certainly if you're using Word or FrameMaker or InDesign or Interleaf, it's maybe a difficult process, but I think metrics are a very good way of understanding, here's where I'm at now, and here's where I think we can be. And then once you understand that information, you go into a gap analysis saying, okay, what are my business needs? What will get me to where I need to be to go meet those business requirements? What is my return on investment? What does that roadmap look like as far as timing, as far as technology, as far as cost? These are the kinds of information that we expect your upper management to want to see and to review before they would approve your project. Then you go into that information architecture stage of saying, okay, how do I go we'll use DITA and pick on DITA. How do I go make DITA right for me? How do I go develop a content reuse strategy? Because I can guarantee you, just as remodeling a house is much more painful than building the house the way you want it the first time, going through and doing this upfront will save you a lot of heartache, it'll save you a lot of gray hair than maybe if you were doing this later on. Once you finish your implementation architecture, go through our information architecture, go into an implementation. You may need to go integrate with third-party systems, go through a content migration because, okay, now I know exactly what are my constraints. I know exactly what my data model is. I know exactly how it should be. Then go into training. And then once your organization, once your writers are trained on it, you can do metrics again and say, here's what we thought we were going to be. How did we actually be? And do I need to go through another iteration of this cycle? And actually, this cycle, I hate to say never ends, but it never ends. Now, one last precautionary note, is that invariably, and if you go to any conference, you will see a lot of vendors selling their technology, and technology is important. Technology is critical. But I think sometimes that we overlook the skills of the writers, and I think sometimes we overlook the process that's involved to create, revise, update, deliver content. I think they're all equally important. Technology is the bright, shiny object in the room, so there's a natural attraction there, but without the right processes, without the right skills, it's very difficult. So, Sidney, maybe we can ask one final poll question.
Yep, for sure, Don. So thank you so much. You've given our listeners lots of info, great info for questions. So before we get into the Q&A, like you said, we'll be asking one final poll question. So have your cursors ready here. I will launch the question, and you can answer on your screens as you did for the first one. So the question is, what is your biggest hurdle with structured content? So again, you'll have 20, 30 seconds to answer the question, and we'll announce the results shortly after. Couple more seconds here, and it looks like we've got all of our answers in. All right. So the results, 5% said cost, 0% said benefit, 79% said changing status quo, 11% said IT support, and 5% said other.
That's really interesting, and it reflects what I've heard is that most people, I think, at some level, certainly at a very, do they understand the benefit of structured content? And certainly most managers say, yeah, we get it, but invariably the biggest hurdles are, how do I go change the status quo? The process of change, and I think that certainly touches to, okay, yeah, I realize tooling is an issue, but how my people work, that's a big deal. It is a very different authoring environment. It's a very different workflow process. The cost is there. I think IT support, as we move more and more to cloud-based solutions, IT support becomes less of an issue, but having their buy-in is always a big deal. So very interesting.
Okay, well, thanks everyone for participating in the poll. And now we'll be moving into our standard Q&A section. So again, a quick reminder that you can type a question into the question section of your control panel. And Dawn is here to answer all of your questions, so go nuts. And the floor is now open. So if you have questions, we encourage you to send them in. We have our first question here, which is, how do I dip into structured content without making a large commitment of time and money?
Good question. I don't know how many of you know Scott Abel, but Scott Abel and I had and this goes back, at least 10 years ago, got into it, and it was a bit staged, but got into a discussion, I'll put it that way, of saying, do you need a content management system to go work with XML? And the dirty, nasty answer is, no, you don't need it, but it's going to make your life so much easier. To the point that my point is that working with structured content without a content management system just to go understand your needs is not a terrible exercise. I think it's a really good exercise. And then once you've had some experience of working with content without that, I think you will have a better understanding of what your needs are. But it's kind of like if I said, Sidney, I would like for you to walk or to get from Montreal to Ottawa. You could walk out of your door and start walking, I guess, northwest. Yeah,
I could.
Yeah, and you'd get there. But gosh, it would probably be a tough journey. Whereas with a car, it's much easier. So I think, can you do it? You can go use Notepad to go create XML. I really don't recommend it. And the cost of the tools is just, it's not maybe as prohibitive as you think. But yeah, I think you certainly can start working with it. We There are things that you can do to your data if you know you're going to go to structured content. You can start saying, I need more consistent information. I need to go identify where my content reuse is. And I'm not going to say these are easy things to go do, but I think they're valuable things to go do to understand, how big is this mountain in front of me? So good question.
Yeah. The next question here is, are there success stories of organizations moving to structured content?
There are, and invariably at most conferences, I think the next one that I will be there, IXIAtalks will be there, is the Best Practices Conference that is in Austin the second week of September. And invariably at those conferences, you will hear success stories. Now, if you're not able to travel to those conferences, we had one from a company called Club Car, which is part of the Ingersoll Rand family of companies. And the Tech Pubs manager there wrote a really, really, really impressive story of, here's what I found here's our results. And Eric gives some very nice before and afters talking about how moving to a DITA environment reduced the number of words in his repository, reduced the volume of his repository, lowered the reading level by implementing simplified technical English, allowed him to go do a lot of things that he couldn't have before. So if you would like to go access that story, you can go to our website, janacorp.com, under media blogs, media then blogs, or if you shoot me an email, I will send you a link to it so you don't have to go dig for it. So, but yeah, that's the one that I thought was really good, and Eric was nice enough to go create a guest blog for us talking about his experiences at Club Car. And if you're interested in one in a specific industry, I suspect I could point you towards someone who's been there, done that, and can tell you the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Thanks, Don. So our last question today, and it's kind of similar to the poll question, is what is the hardest part, in your opinion, of moving to structured content?
Well, Sidney, I think you guys kind of answered, or the audience members kind of answered that one. It's changing the status quo. It's the technology has gotten really, really, really good, and the tools have become very intuitive to use. But changing how your writers think of content. If you think about it, most people in a DITA world, they're not starting at the beginning and finishing at the end and working their way through it. But invariably, people will more specialize. So if you're working on controllers, then that's their focus, and they'll work across controllers regardless of what the product line is. And in a mechanical world, I'm a car guy. So if you're working on transmissions, and that's your area of expertise, you work on transmissions regardless, and you know where the reuse is for that part of your product. So, but it's a different way of thinking of things. XML is very different because you stop worrying about 14-point Times New Roman and start thinking about what are the tags that I need? What is the metadata I need? What is the do I need to go create a short description so that when someone searches for the content, they're not presented with the first paragraph. They're presented with, okay, this information is about this. And I think the status quo is a good place that that all of us need to, certainly that support this industry, say, how do we go reduce that hurdle?
So we actually have one more question here, Don. It says your putting it all together image showed content migration before training. Is this assuming that content migration was handled by an external vendor?
No, it's not. But with that wheel chart, sometimes are things blurred. Yes, sometimes things are blurred. I know some organizations will use content migration as a training experience. That once you understand the basics of the data model, once you understand the basics of the tool, let's go convert content. Typically, the reason that I say go do the content conversion first is it gives the writer content that's already set up, hopefully correctly, as material for them to go learn with. Can you go flip those around? Sure. And if you don't have a lot of content, I would, don't have a lot of content is a few thousand pages. Okay, go convert it by hand. Copy and paste, whatever you, and copy and paste is the most frequent data conversion methodology, and use that as part of your training. And I think that's very viable. And I don't think you want to go to an outside third-party support or using an external tool. And there's a couple of them out there that you want to go use that as part of the training methodology.
Thank you, Don. So that's it for questions. And I wanted to thank both Don and everyone else for tuning into IXIAtalks episode 8. Don, thank you so much for joining us. This has been a great webinar, and I hope everyone has enjoyed it and the polling section as well. So our next webinar will be on September 19th. So you can tune in for a talk with the software architect at Synchrosoft, Octavian Nadalou, for an engaging presentation on custom business rules for data projects. So we'll be sending you an invite in the next few weeks. And if you would like to be featured in one of our webinars or have a unique topic idea, please get in touch at team.ccms@ixiasoft.com. So Don, thank you very much.
Thank you, Sidney. Thank you all for joining us.
And we'll see you all next month.